Thank you, Craig. So my name is Kees van Bochove. I'm the founder of The Hive, and it's my honor to introduce the Study-A-Thon and present sort of the main cast of characters here. Also, a special welcome for anyone that's joined just for this presentation and maybe new to OHDSI. You are very welcome. I hope this call gives you a bit of a flavor of the community, and you're excited to work with this more. If you could go a slide further, Carl. Just to frame these activities a little bit, and the company that I started, The Hive, is focused on open science, but in fact, the OHDSI community is also in open science and has that as a mission. And medical research, of course, always have been very relevant for society, but there's no other better time to really understand this than today with COVID, where we directly have studies on, let's say, the safety of a drug or the effectiveness of a vaccine affect our everyday lives. And so in this study-a-thon, we've also tried to focus on being inclusive in terms of including patients, for instance, in the research, being very transparent in how we create the protocol, the cohorts, etc. And we'll tell you a little bit more about our experience with that. And if you want to know more about this angle, there's also a chapter on the Book of OHDSI on open science. If you could go forward, Carl, the context of this study-a-thon is that there is a number of IMI projects. IMI is Innovative Medicine Initiative. It's a collaboration of the European Commission and the FPA, the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Associations. And there is a program right now that focuses on a number of specific disease areas, like PIONEER for prostate cancer, but also others like Big Data at Heart. And there's EHDEN, which, if you're in OHDSI, undoubtedly you've heard of before, which aims to build a European network of health data sources. And the origin of this study-a-thon is essentially collaboration between PIONEER and EHDEN to organize a study-a-thon with the OHDSI community on prostate cancer. And PIONEER project identified a number of important research questions of interest. If you can go to the next one, Carl. The one that we selected because it's suitable for this type of research is to investigate the natural history of outcomes of prostate cancer patients that are managed with a watchful waiting. And in a minute, Giorgio will tell you a bit more about that. It's a conservative management option for prostate cancer patients. And we wanted to, first of all, characterize the outcome. So, in OHDSI speak, the clinical characterization, but at the same time also build a prediction model and see if we could create some risk scores that could inform patients about their possible risks. And if you can go on to the next one, Carl. So the hardest thing was to find out that research question and really bring this connection. We would not have been able to organize the study-a-thon, though, without all the people you see here and many others. In particular, I think it's nice to point out that the management team, which was mostly populated from PIONEER, everyone knows Christian. If you're an OHDSI, Christian, right, from IQVIA, and there's myself. I've also been active in OHDSI for quite some time, but you'll notice that the other names are probably new to you. And I think that was also one of the nice aspects of this study-a-thon, that most of the people participating and also most of the organizing team came outside of the OHDSI community. And yet we were able to run this study and to bring everyone on board. We were very fortunate to have a great cast of sub-team leads. So people like Katharina Bayer that organized the literature review beforehand, and a number of other speakers you're going to hear from in a minute. All right, if you can go to the next one, Carl. As I said, we focused on clinical characterization and prediction. So these were two main groups during the study-a-thon that we have active. But if you've ever been to a study-a-thon before, there is another very important group, which is the phenotyping, and that actually creates the cohort definitions that are used by both these applications. And then, of course, there's the supporting team that creates the study package and makes it all happen on the technical side. So these were the 4 running teams that we had during the study-a-thon, and you're going to hear from each of them a little bit in a minute. If you can go to the next one, Carl, just to point out here that we had a really nice representation from multiple types of stakeholders. As I said before, we have patients. You're going to hear a bit more about what they brought to our study-a-thon from Ariel, but we also had quite a few clinicians, like really urologists that participated, and even people also with a guidelines background. And that was amazing because this allows us to directly bridge to the healthcare practice. And then finally, just to back up the what I said before, that this is like a study-a-thon which was not from the usual suspects in OHDSI. You see that most of them really were the first study-a-thon. And in terms of the geographical representation, last slide from my part, Carl, it was a lot of Europe, not surprisingly, because the PIONEER is predominantly a European project, but we even had people from Middle East, Australia during nighttime, and of course, United States as well. I'm now going to hand it over to Giorgio, who will tell you a little bit more about the clinical context and the research context of this study-a-thon.
Good afternoon. My name is Giorgio Gandaglia. I am a urologist at Vita Salute San Raffaele University in Italy, Milan, and I will give you a few concepts related to prostate cancer and why answering to this specific question, which are the long-term outcomes of patients managed with watchful waiting, is important from a clinical point of view. As you can see, prostate cancer is the second most common cancer in the world, and we have more than 1 million cases per year in the worldwide, with more than 30,000 deaths per year in the United States alone. This is based on the most recent statistics. And prostate cancer is an heterogeneous disease where we have several different options in terms of therapies. We have curative intent treatments such as surgery, radical prostatectomy, or radiotherapy. And we have conservative management, which implies the use of active surveillance and watchful waiting. When we have symptomatic progression, which is not so common in a prostate cancer patient, but as you can see, based on the epidemiology of the disease, we have quite a huge number of patients experiencing metastasis and then dying from the disease itself, where we can administer palliative therapies. Can we move to the next slide, please? When we focus on expectant management or conservative therapies, we have 2 main options. One is active surveillance and one is watchful waiting. And both options imply that patients are not managed with curative intent therapies up front, but on the other hand, they are different in terms of the intent. When we talk about active surveillance, the intent is actually to cure the patient. We are just delaying the administration of curative intent therapies, and patients are men with a relatively long life expectancy, more than 10 years, and the aim of active surveillance is to minimize treatment-related toxicity without compromising survival. We follow up regularly our patients with PSA testing, biopsy, rebiopsy, digital rectal examination, and imaging, multiparametric MRI, as soon as the patient has a bad sign of the disease, so the disease is not a favorable disease anymore, we administer a curative intent therapy, such as surgery or radiotherapy. On the other hand, when we talk about watchful waiting, we are dealing with patients with a relatively short life expectancy, shorter than 10 years typically, and the aim is to minimize treatment-related toxicity in patients where the relatively long natural history of prostate cancer itself is unlikely to expose this patient to the risk of metastasis, clinical progression, and of dying from prostate cancer itself. So we can use this approach to all patients, all stages, but we are mainly limiting this therapeutic approach to men with short life expectancy, and it is basically a treatment with a palliative intent. Can we move to the next slide, please? And to put this in context, I will give you a practical example of a man, 82 years old. He's a smoker. He has several comorbidities, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and he got a diagnosis of prostate cancer based on a PSA of 10 nanogram per ml, a palpable disease at digital rectal examination, a biopsy with a Gleason score 4+3, and he had a negative CT scan and bone scan. Next slide. Okay, thank you. And you can see that at 10-year follow-up, the probability for this specific case of dying from prostate cancer itself is 1 out of 100, while he's likely to die from other causes, and 95% of the cases will die from other cause mortality rather than cancer-specific mortality. On the other hand, when we treat this patient with radical prostatectomy or radiotherapy, 1 out of 3 of cases will experience urinary incontinence or other side effects with a long-term impact on quality of life. Next slide, please. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna take over. Thanks everyone for being here. Asieh Golozar. So as Giorgio said, we're interested in identifying a cohort of patients undergoing watchful waiting, characterize them, and further do some prediction work. Very interesting topic. He told you a lot about like why it's important, but as I'm going to talk to you about, I want to just give you an overview of some of the challenges we've had to deal with and some of the questions, the hurdles we need to handle. Specifically, we're looking at watchful waiting, conservative management. We're looking at lack of an event, lack of an intervention. We usually, in a lot of the work that we do, we define the cohorts based on an observation. We look at the impact of an intervention. Here, we're dealing with the lack of an event. What does that mean? How do we define this cohort? And so who are patients who are getting conservative management? Are these who are not receiving any treatment at the time of diagnosis, a month after diagnosis, or a year after diagnosis? That was question number one. Number two, assuming that we define this population that are undergoing conservative management, we had to distinguish between watchful waiting and active surveillance, right? At the time that a patient is assigned to either one of them, this is an intent of a treatment that exists in the physician mind. It is not noted in the data. We didn't have any context to be able to distinguish between the two. So another pretty much big challenge to define our cohort, our patient population. We've had several discussions. It's an effort of a team of clinicians and all the other folks that were part of the Study-A-Thon to see how we can address and define these populations, specifically to be able to identify patients who have received or undergone conservative management after diagnosis. We decided to come up with an arbitrary cutoff of 6 months. So 6 months time frame after diagnosis of prostate cancer. If a patient hasn't received any treatment, we would call them conservative management. Of course, it has the caveat of why 6 months. This is coming from clinical input, and we know how to deal with that when it comes to the analysis and interpretation. This is something that we had to do back and forth to and then be aware of. The second one, watchful waiting versus active surveillance. We don't have the context. We don't know what is really happening. It is possible to look in the future and see like how intensely a patient has been surveyed to say that this patient is potentially active surveillance patient and the other one is not. We all know that this is wrong. We cannot do that. We're basically going to come up with a biased population and pretty much characterize what we've selected on. So we decided as PIONEER team not to attempt to distinguish active surveillance from watchful waiting at the time of diagnosis or at that 6 month time frame when we pretty much define conservative management. I'm going to show you later on how we're trying to address this question. try to identify those patients who are more likely to be to have received watchful waiting or active surveillance. Carl, can we go to the next slide, please? So after a lot of discussion, we defined, so we started with a couple of target cohorts, started with defining all newly diagnosed prostate cancer patients. I'll tell you a little bit more about how we went through the development of that. At the 6-month time frame, we look to see whether a patient has received any treatment or not. And we defined 2 cohorts of prostate cancer patients who've received with immediate management or active treatment, and then a cohort of patients who have received conservative management or delayed management. And further on, to be able to do that, we incorporated some of the information that we know. So, for example, if a patient on the risk groups, high risk, low risk, and immediate risk, to be able to come up with some definition that has been shown and used and kind of validated in the literature to be able to identify them. Specifically, if at the 6-month time frame a patient has an intermediate or high-risk prostate cancer, we will call them a group of conservative management or watchful waiting patients. And an 18-month time frame, well, based on a combination of risk score and also the intensity of surveillance from time of diagnosis to month 18, we will define 2 different cohorts, with the caveat that we have to incorporate all that in the interpretation of the result and defining our index state and what it means in terms of the comparability of the findings between and across cohorts, and also generalizability of the results. Next slide, please. So first step was to define newly diagnosed prostate cancer. We all know that we see a diagnostic code, but that does not necessarily mean that this is the first time a patient is diagnosed with a condition, here prostate cancer. For this question, we wanted to specifically identify incident prostate cancer and then look and see what will happen to them in terms of the treatment assignment. First step, we went to the literature to see what has been done, whether and if there are validated approaches. Good news was that there are a couple of different ones. All of them were in agreement that a combination of a prostate cancer diagnosis and prostate biopsy would give an algorithm or a definition that has a very high sensitivity and positive predictive value, gave us a lot of confidence that we can potentially build something around it. But there was a difference across all these algorithms, and the difference was the timing of biopsy with respect to time of diagnosis. And it went from 20 days to 3 months to 6 months, and like all of them had like positives and negatives, but we know that this combination works. To find that data biopsy that we could use in PIONEER, we looked into the data. So if you look at the second part under data, this is a histogram. We just looked at the distribution of the days from biopsy to diagnosis. This data coming from approximately 1 million prostate cancer patients who have biopsy results. We see that the majority of the biopsy is happening around a month within the diagnosis of prostate cancer biopsy, diagnosis of prostate cancer. So having this, and then using what we learned from the literature, we came with a PIONEER definition for newly diagnosed prostate cancer. And also we had this incorporation of the clinical input, meaning that we require the patient to have a first diagnosis of prostate cancer, prostate biopsy within 30 days of their diagnosis. We also included PSA of above 50 nanograms per milliliter, because based on the clinical input that we got, if a patient is diagnosed with a very high PSA, they're very unlikely to go under biopsy. We require patients to have no prior history of prostate cancer or any related conditions, specifically prostate dysplasia the year before, and they haven't been under any ADT, androgen deprivation therapy, or other hormonal therapies associated with prostate cancer. Some of you might remember that I tried to show the tutorial of how we actually created this cohort a couple of weeks back. So next slide, please. So we defined the cohorts. We found the definition that we could use for prostate cancer, newly diagnosed prostate cancer, but we also wanted to look into outcomes, right? And the 2 main outcomes of interest in this study was one, death, and the second one is progression after which the patient will receive treatment. So take a look at this diagram. Patient will receive conservative management, AS, or watchful waiting. Some of the, and specifically if you want to think about watchful waiting in this context, some of these patients, and during their follow-up, they die. Some of them, they experience progression, after which they receive palliative treatment, and further on, they experience death. So the goal of the study, as Kees said, was in the characterization, just describe these patients. Who are they? What are they, their specific comorbidities and clinical characteristics? And what are the outcomes? Like, what is the time to progression, time to death? And in our prediction, we're very interested, and our goal was to identify patients who are likely to experience death before progression, because if we put these patients on watchful waiting and we see that, we know that the treatment decision-making was most appropriate for them. Next slide with this. So again, we had to tackle some challenges, right? One of them was the data capture. We're all interested in progression, but the specifics on tumor attributes here, progression, is not really something that's available. It exists, but deep down in the data, and it's not something that we can easily pick up on. The other one is death. We all know that it's not available everywhere, and where available, there's potential of underreporting. If it's reported, it's there, but lack of reporting doesn't mean the patient is really alive. And also, we're interested in deaths from prostate cancer, but reliable information on the cause of death is, again, something not available, not routinely available. And also, if it's there, might not be reliable. Also, we're dealing with competing risks, right? So we have like, we can't have patients who experience both death and progression, especially if a patient dies, that person cannot experience progression. And then that creates a lot of issues in terms of comparability of the two predicted, true probability prediction and the probabilities over time. We had some solutions for that in PIONEER. So first, instead of focusing on specifics of progression, we use symptomatic progression as a surrogate for progression. And these are generally when it happens, the patient is receiving treatment, palliative treatment, to actually control those symptoms, right? And then we also use treatment initiation as another surrogate for progression. In terms of the other ones, we're working to come up with an idea that can be actually look into an event called death before progression or treatment initiation. And any sort of death that happens with that, we can actually say that this is death due to other causes. So with all that, next slide, Carl, please. We got to work, right? And just have this in mind that from everything that we do in OHDSI, we decided to come up and tackle some of the most challenging questions: lack of an observation, issues with index state, no context, death, progression. And we came up to some solutions and conclusions. We, together, we defined 62 new cohorts. I have to say that we leveraged some of the cohorts that were already defined by Legend and Charybdis, which was a great help. But we also created 20 target cohorts, 7 outcomes, and 35 strata. All of them are available in PIONEER Atlas. We run Cohort Diagnostics in 10 different databases. We validated our definitions, we fixed and finalized the phenotypes, and we handed over to our package development team. And Bertrand is going to tell you more about the rest of the story. Thanks.
Thanks, Asieh. I'm Bertrand de Meulder. I'm a bioinformatician out of Lyon in France, and I will be talking a little bit more about the results that we had in the study-a-thon. So this slide shows the data that we expected to have when we started the study-a-thon, and this is from within PIONEER. Our industry partners provided access to the data that you see on the right from Bayer, Astellas, and IQVIA. But if you go to the next one, Carl, during the study-a-thon preparation and the week itself, we actually got access to much more data sets that we expected. With a current total number of prostate cancer patients in cohort 1 above 1.4 million and still growing. So this is already a very good results. Next one, Carl. The summary of the achievements and the goals that we had. So we have Cohort Diagnostics for 1.4 million patients in a Shiny app that is available. We have a functional R package for federated data analytics that is also available from the GitHub. We have prediction models for time to death, symptomatic progression, and initiation of treatment under development, soon to be released. The study protocol for the clinical characterization is available and published. The one for prediction is soon to be published. We have, out of the prediction model, a plan to build a risk score for use in the clinics by the physicians. We also have a characterization Shiny app that is available One of the things we're very proud of is that we managed to include the patient voice in all of the week and around all the discussions around this. And we also developed communication channels with both EHDEN and OHDSI that we are very grateful for. So next one, Carl. For the study execution itself, we presented the tasks to the data holders as a series of simple instructions with adding functionalities throughout the week from tasks 1 to 4. 4 is soon to be released. So to spare the data holders from all the debugging and all the discussions around those. And we also plan the task number 5 for the prediction package, again soon to be released. We added functionalities to these, the time to event analysis and the Kaplan-Meier plots generation. That is going to be in task 4, currently debugging. We reused a lot of OHDSI existing packages from Charybdis, from the bladder cancer study, but we didn't know about these until very late in the planning process. So one advice or one comment from PIONEER to OHDSI is that we should try to better publicize this resource. Having perhaps an online library of existing R packages would be very useful. And so during the execution time, we also established a feedback loop with both phenotypes team and the clinicians to make sure that we are actually capturing the right patients and that the data we are pulling out makes sense. As an example, next one, please, Carl. This is a snapshot from the Cohort Diagnostics app. I don't expect you to read all of this, but just know that we have usual suspects in OHDSI, CPRD, Market Scan, Optum, but we also have new data set coming in. One from French hospital EMR from Bordeaux, Estonian population data, also the Dutch Cancer Registry, and more are coming in as we speak. Overall, in the cohort 1, so newly diagnosed prostate cancer patients, as I said, we hit 1.4 million patients. Next one, please. This is the snapshot from the characterization app. Here I compared the open claims, so a US-based database, the cohort T1A, so the newly diagnosed prostate cancer patients, against the prostate cancer patients under conservative management, so cohort T3. As you can see here, the number of patients is quite high, more than 1 million. And you can see the differences between those two cohorts, which is one of the things that we wanted to be able to do in this analysis. These are still preliminary results. This is from task number 3. We hope that the numbers are still going up and that we get more precision into this in the very close future. Next one, please, Carl. This is a snapshot of the PLP development process. So we have tried a lot of models, a lot of algorithms with a lot of variation in the settings, in the hyperparameters, and also in the covariates. This is under development, but I have in the next one a snapshot of the prediction of onset of symptoms in the database Optum from Bayer. Very quickly, you can see that we actually can separate prostate cancer patients managed with conservative management who had a symptomatic progression from those that didn't. So the juice is there. We need to get it, extract it and present it in the right way. My next slide is the last one. So the status report on the PLP package. We have, as I just showed you, a working PLP package on claims data. The protocol is finalized and soon going to be published. We managed to reach consensus with the clinicians, which was a very important process. Next step for the prediction is to include specific covariates in the prediction package and also to send that package to the data partners for the model development and validation. As I mentioned already, this is going to be task number 5, hopefully coming in the next weeks or so. Now I hand over the mic to Ariel from Movember, who is going to get a little bit more context around the patients and the organization of the Study-A-Thon.
Thanks, Bertrand. I'll be talking about process and building on Katie's question. Something that I brought to the team that we didn't build for was the side of project management, implementation science, and evaluation of the Study-A-Thon. And communications. So those were good skills to integrate. And involving patients was one of the unique things about this study-a-thon. We had 4 patients with lived experience of prostate cancer who shared their disease stories. They held a Q&A session with the participants, and they actually joined the study-a-thon teams. And this gave our participants additional perspective for their work. For some of them, that would have been their first patient interaction, and really framed how these study-a-thon outcomes should be used. We had tangible outcomes that, for example, asking, what things do you care most about in the prediction model? And they're talking about emphasizing quality of life measures over survival measures. And they actively contributed to creating additional cohorts. But there's also the intangibles or the insights that you don't really plan for. So they talked about how the data that is captured does not always reflect the patient's view. So for a prostate cancer patient, if they have 5 drops of urine leakage in a day, they feel incontinent. That doesn't class as incontinent yet from a clinician's point of view. And they talked about how to communicate the results, having lay summaries in the publications, using multiple languages where possible, and creating a bridge between statisticians and patients using patient advocates. So they were an immense value add. We'll definitely involve them in future study-a-thons, maybe bring them on earlier, try to be a bit more specific in disease subtypes, and have a strategy on how to deal with these unexpected insights. Next, please. So in addition to the patient participation, participants really valued the collaboration, the quality of the participants, lots of admiration for their colleagues and what they brought to the table, the organization, as well as the opportunities for learning, fun, and deep dives into the subject matter. Of course, there's room for improvement. On the next slide. So the biggest area was having more training, more information prior to the event, and this also tied into the division of tasks, being able to give people who didn't automatically fit into one of the category useful work. There were some issues around the data quality and access. As mentioned, tech capacity, having more coders, some things we couldn't really influence in this COVID world, that people wanted to meet in person and have a supply coffee and food. But on the next slide, you'll see overall, we got good feedback we used Mentimeter for pulse checks and collecting information. And of those who responded, most of them were going to be active in the post-study-a-thon stage and wanted to attend another study-a-thon. Next. I'll finish up with some lessons learned. So cancer data are particularly complex, which makes it very important that we had a data-thon well before the study-a-thon where we could explore the limitations and potential of the data sets. As Asieh mentioned, it is really difficult when critical information about management intent, disease progression can only be inferred from the shadows it casts in the databases. But we've proven that study-a-thons can be led outside of OHDSI, but to ensure success, it was really useful having guidance to the management team at critical points during the study-a-thon. And we encourage having training for new participants and libraries of reusable resources, schedules, slides, those existing analytics tools, and maybe a final call out that I think a lot of the study-a-thon participants don't really identify with the OHDSI community yet. Maybe there's an advertising opportunity to bring them into OHDSI. Going to pass to Robert Snijder to wrap up.
And thank you, Ariel. Yeah, so I will only take 1 or 2 minutes to finalize this presentation, and then there's about 10 minutes for questions and answers, hopefully. So first of all, we're not done yet. We're still ongoing. We have 2 publications in the make. We have a prediction team that still have to do a bit of package creation and results analyzing. But interestingly, we also set up an estimation group that actually started after the study-a-thon. Same topics, of course, estimation with this patients that are not treated may be a bit difficult, but we have some thoughts around this that might work. Also, interestingly, it's a Chinese team is doing that, and that's for a European organization. We have a Chinese group in Beijing, very willing to own up their data and to help us out to doing this. During the study-a-thon, we noticed that actually data owners first just joined, but then really want to join and provide their data in a federated fashion to work with it to get results out of their data. And they keep on joining. It seems that having a study-a-thon fires off quite some collaborative nature with people, and they are very willing to help us out. It's stressed a couple of times, and I can't stress it enough, study-a-thons with patients are such an addition to what I've seen before. They really give some additional input, things that you as a scientist, as a data analyst, as a clinician never thought of, but they think of because that's their day-to-day life, that's where they live with. Very valuable for us, and we keep on doing that for future study-a-thons. What I think is also overwhelmingly great, and I like to thank the OHDSI community for this because they brought it a bit to us, is that study-a-thons brings a very collaborative nature to doing analysis. And actually the topic becomes more alive if you do it in a group. Even we had to do it virtual. I'm sure if we would do it in a non-virtual, it would have even been more exciting, but it was already quite an energetic event. So next, what we're going to do, yes, we will do more study-a-thons. We hope to plan something at the end of the year. I hope that some of you will join us. The collaboration with OHDSI was great, and we hope to continue doing that. We will have quite a few different questions that we need to answer. This is about non-treated patients. We have a lot of treatments that we like to talk about. And importantly, and I promised Christian to mention it, we want to see data with genomics in it, so we can do some analysis with that. That will be absolutely great. We're also exploring other formats, like we hope to get some students, PhD students, to do some thesis around the topic with our data and our questions. That would be great. We've done a small hackathon in the preparation for the study-a-thon, which is kind of a mini study-a-thon, a one-day study-a-thon. We might consider that again in future events as well, just having one-day event where we answer a simple, maybe simpler question, things like that. And thank you for your time, and thank you for listening to us. And I hope it was a learning and education for you as well as it was for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you everybody for that really wonderful presentation. A virtual applause is happening right now, but really just well coordinated and incredible effort. We have about 8 minutes, so certainly time for questions. If anyone wants to use the hand raising feature, and I can call on people. While you think of questions, I believe, Carl, you have the slides. If you would email them to me afterwards, I'd like to certainly post them wherever we can. So any questions? I know maybe some people don't have the hand raising option, so if you want to just unmute yourself and ask, please feel free.
So Craig, while we're waiting on questions, I see in the chat that they were mentioning ideas on continuing this task around the active surveillance aspect of this. Of course, this is very interesting to us. We have in PIONEER a research question around active surveillance, and any data for this is very, very welcome.
I see Patrick just posted in the chat to the entire team, so really anyone can take this. What was the main scientific insight that you've learned thus far? I know it's tough to ask the open-ended question where 1 in 6 people has to choose, but really, if anyone wants to take that.
Well, I just want to say, maybe not a scientific aspect, but one of the most interesting conversations we actually had after the study-a-thon, thanks also to James Sandow, who is the project lead for PIONEER, with the guidelines office and the regulatory context, and to get that feedback of this is how you could also design the study such that we can directly take this up into regulatory guidance. That was kind of a special moment for me, because of course that's where we'll do it for, is in the end to improve healthcare, but to have that very direct feedback as a researcher, you kind of don't expect that. So that was special for me. And by the way, this is still far from done also on the scientific aspect, because this the definition of someone is under active surveillance or someone is under watchful waiting, just the way we did it is you can definitely have doubts. So the peer review process will be interesting as well. But I think sorry, there was someone else that wanted to comment.
No, Kees, I wanted to just follow up on what you said. So Patrick, wait for the fun results to come out. It's going to be very good. But just a general learning of the journey was that we learned that we have to do it together, and it's through communication. As Kees said, the definitions plays an important role. How do we define it? What do they mean? And that was the biggest learning, and that's what we actually learned, and how they actually apply within different sources of data. Like what are we measuring? What are we comparing? And if we want to later on take it to guidelines, what does that really mean? So still a lot of work to be done, but I think we all learned how correct definition, how collaboration can make something this big and this complicated happen.
Yeah. I mean, Patrick, right now it's characterization, and that sounds kind of like boring, but it's not, because this is a treatment which is essentially a lack of treatment, and it has developed over the last 20, 25 years, and we don't actually really know what these patients are that get into that treatment, which means they didn't get a treatment, and who they are. And then the next steps, of course, as Kees and Asieh said, is to learn, do we do the right decision, and do we get the choice right, whether we should treat them or we shouldn't treat them. That has a huge, when it's done, a huge impact, because there are many, many, many patients like this in the world. And right now, this is done not in the absence of evidence, but certainly not at the level of evidence that we should apply. Yeah.
And if I can add to that, Christian, I think that this is a really exciting exercise as well in personalized medicine. We tend to think of personalized medicine as getting the right treatment for the patient, but actually that prediction score and being able to look at how your comorbidities and your personal situation affect the outcomes, that's huge at making, finding that where you sit in that 1 in 100 and what your form of the disease is.
I believe, Alex, you have your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Oh, yes, I'm playing with the hand, so it's working. So, yeah, I just want to make just one comment. I want to thank everyone who have been involved in the PIONEER Study-A-Thon. It has been an experience. I think I've attended a couple, but this was an interesting one. But Red, the comment I want to make is related to one of the slides, I think that Robert was talking about. We are not done yet. So I'm just inviting people within OHDSI that you can still join us in the Study-A-Thon, although we have done most of the work, but the more data we can get into our Study-A-Thon, I think the better.
So if people do want to join, what's the best way to get involved or stay involved?
Bertrand? Yep.
So either contact me or Susan Axelson, Evans Axelson, sorry. The contacts are in the slides, in the slide deck after the ones we showed. So all the emails address are there. And if you want to get involved, we will send towards you the task number 4 when it's ready soon. And then we just add your results to the list.
Great. Thanks. We'll have that information as well on the community calls page. So this recording will be posted. Please share it. Once we get it out there, please share it with your own networks. Let's get the word out about this important work and the fact that there's ongoing activities that still need to be handled, and get this information out to as many people as possible, because you don't know maybe who's got some skills or some interest in this area that might join. All right, I think we have hit the hour. So again, thank you to everybody, certainly all 6 presenters, and Carl, I know you were a big part of this, and everybody from Pioneer who really helped lead this effort, and also our collaborators in OHDSI and EHDEN, everybody who took part in this. It was really an amazing thing. And if there's ever future updates that you'd like to come on and share, please reach out. Certainly, we'd love to have you anytime. But thank you again for the time and effort you put into this presentation. It was wonderful, and really just great to hear all the work that was done and what's coming up. So with that, I will say goodbye. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Great stuff.